However, in recent decades, religion, and especially the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, has increasingly been profiling three positive elements from their traditions. One, a turn toward this world. Two, an emphasis on human freedom, and hence also responsibility. And three, the embrace of dialogue. First point, turn toward this world. The renowned scholar of religion, Robert Bellah, famously traced the history of religion in its various stages. He wrote of the period of the millennium before the Common Era as what he designated the historic religions. This is when the great world religions arose: Confucianism, Taoism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, Greek philosophy. This is also the same period that the German philosopher and psychologist Karl Jaspers referred to as the axial period. Bellah noted a major shift in the attitude toward the world exhibited by the so-called historic religions, where in what he called primitive religion, men and women understood themselves solely as part of the community and part of nature. In historic religion, a transcendent world beyond this one was discerned. The transcendent world was seen as so vastly superior to this world that one learned to disdain this world, to distance oneself from it, in order to better attain the transcendent world. This breaking with the cosmological unity of their earlier primitive and archaic stages, and a sharing of common transcendentalism among the historic religions, made all of them dualistic in the sense that there were two overarching realities: the this worldly and the otherworldly, or transcendental. What was sought then was not so much to be in harmony with the society and the world about oneself, as in primitive religion, nor to placate the gods through sacrifice, as in archaic religion. Rather, what was sought was something that might be called salvation from a, quote, as he put it, from a basic flaw far more serious than those conceived of by earlier religions, whether by clinging, tanha, from what was essentially fleeting, as in Buddhism, or whether from ignorance, avidya in Hinduism, or agnoya in Socratic religion, or from a turning away from God, hamartia, sin in Judaism. For the masses, the new dualism, again to quote from Bellah, was expressed in the difference between this world and the life after death. Religious concern focused on this life in primitive and archaic religions now tended to focus on life in the other realm, the otherworldly reality. And thus, the religious goal of salvation, or enlightenment, release, whatever term you wish to use, was for the first time the central religious preoccupation. End of the quote. But that focus began to shift in the wake of the 18th century Enlightenment in Europe. There was launched in Europe great movements towards social justice, whether concerning slaves, workers, women, or others, in the name of religion, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish. This turn toward this world moved even more rapidly and radically with the Second Vatican Council of the Catholic Church in 1962 to 65 and afterward, especially as reflected in that council's document, The Church and the Modern World, which in effect launched liberation theology worldwide. And Catholic liberation theology then in turn inspired women's liberation, black liberation, Minjung theology, socially concerned Buddhism, and on and on. Second point, the emphasis on human freedom and responsibility. We are now increasingly learning that not only is freedom at the very heart of humanity, but that a radical freedom and indeterminacy is at the very core of the universe itself. Already in the early part of the 20th century, we learned of the Heisenberg principle of indeterminacy. Now this may seem quite uninteresting to the non-physicist, but it has huge implications. It means that at the very foundation of our physical reality there is a radical freedom. Hence, when we humans experience or feel a radical freedom at the heart of our being, it is not some anomaly, not something strange. Our human sense of radical freedom, despite all the restraining limitations we may also experience, is something that is very much in sync with the very physical foundation of our bodies and of the whole universe. We humans, of course, have always been radically free, but in much of the history of humanity, most women and men were told that for the most part they were not free, and physically were prevented from exercising most of their freedom. Only a very few elite humans, mostly males, were relatively fully free. Vast numbers of humans were unfree. Now, in the theological sphere, nobody really follows those theologians who taught determinism or predestination. Ask yourself, what preacher gets up in the pulpit on a Sunday morning and tells his congregation that there is nothing they can do about whether they're going to go to heaven or not? God decided that when he created them. Well, the obvious conclusion by the congregation, if they believed him, would be to save the money by firing him and closing the church. No Christian preacher really seems to believe that we humans are not radically free and hence share in responsibility for our so-called salvation, despite his sometimes confusing and self-contradictory teaching. Not at any rate if he hopes to keep his job. Something, however, new burst upon the world, as I said, in the European 18th century Enlightenment, despite all its bashing that it receives from some of my colleagues in the academic world. With its lifting up of human critical thinking and its sense of history and change, and most of all, its sense of human freedom, and hence worldwide democracy. This incredible revolution was unleashed over 2 centuries ago in Western Europe, but has long since become global and is sweeping forward with astonishingly increasing acceleration. For millennia, the vast majority of persons in the world were subjects, indeed largely abject subjects of both secular and religious authorities. As Jean-Jacques Rousseau, not long before the French Revolution, remarked, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is enslaved, he is in chains." With the inner core, or when the inner core of human freedom finally began to break through to a tipping point of freedom, it became unstoppable. Everybody wanted to exercise her or his radical human freedom, even though almost all the civil and religious forces resisted viciously